Centre and originator of the highly effective and simple CEDRIC method. She's author of the groundbreaking book, Food is Not the Problem, Deal with What Is. And also she appears on TV as an expert speaker in radio and in print media. Since its establishment in 1995, the CEDRIC method has helped thousands of men and women to heal completely from their stressful relationship with food and weight. And you can look her up on the website, CEDRICCentre.com. So without further ado, welcome Michelle.
Thank you. Well, I know what it takes me to get out to an evening with all the other bits and pieces I have in my life. So I appreciate what it means that you're here. And I hear an echo. Is it just me? Don't stand so close to the speaker. Okay, which is where my laptop is, so that's going to be fun. I'm going to go over here and see how that goes.
I'll turn it down.
Okay.
Could move the speaker a little this way.
Yeah,
there you go. The cord's long enough.
Is this taking these presentations? You can have.
Whether you want it at the end.
Well, I have a lot that I want to share with you. So if it were up to me, we'd go straight through. So would that be okay? And if I see eyes glazing over and people yawning, then I'll give you a break, but otherwise we'll keep trucking. And again, please just, I won't take it personally if you get up and use the loo or have to head out. The other thing I wanted to share with you is the thing that when I was asked to give this presentation, the way I read the invitation was that these presentations are attended by a good mix of counseling professionals or mental health professionals as well as general community members. So keeping that in mind, I thought to myself, what I'd really like to do then is I'd like to give a presentation tonight mostly geared towards the general community member. But I will throw in little bits and pieces here, and please feel free if you're a practitioner and you're working with clients who struggle with the use of food to cope, to ask a question. How would you handle this? Or how would you even bring that up, Michelle? Or what would you do if a client said this? Please make use of this opportunity to ask those questions. But know that the presentation is really going to be kind of how I would, if I were meeting with someone maybe for the first time, help them to understand what's really going on. And I'm going to lay out for them generally what it is we're going to do in our work together to help them to feel differently. And when I say feel differently, for me and most of the people that come, when those things aren't troubling you anymore, that's when I'll consider our work to be successful, not until then. So that's what I'm about to teach you, is how to approach life so that all those things can get taken care of. But the title of the topic, specific to the food emotion power struggle, because that's what a lot of people will relate to. Our culture is, as you know, fairly preoccupied with body image and weight and diet, increasingly since the 70s, but you know, it has been for a very, very long time. So food and what we look like and whether we perceive ourselves to be acceptable or appropriate in society's eyes or in our mother's eyes is really a big issue for a lot of people. So for me, talking about this particular issue is really actually talking about how we feel about ourselves, how we think about ourselves, how we relate to other people, how deserving or worthy we feel of the things we want in our life. And so that's really what we're going to be talking about tonight, using the umbrella of food, okay? So I'm going to do a little exercise with you so I can chill out. Would that be okay? So it's a 4-7-8 exercise. It's an exercise that I teach everybody who comes to see me, because one of the things that's happening with people who use food to cope is that we have this thought process, and I'll tell you lots about it as we go through the evening, but we have this thought process that kicks in as soon as we feel anything that isn't peaceful. As soon as we feel at all unsettled, even if it's because we're thirsty, or we're tired, or we're PMSing, or we just had an argument with somebody, or we missed our bus, it doesn't really matter what it is. There's this auto-connect to feeling at all unsettled, and us immediately starting to worry and fret. And lots of that process is unconscious. And then the next natural thing that happens for most people is that chemically what happens is our dopamine levels drop because we're stressing ourselves out. Our cortisol levels are going up, dopamine is dropping, we're in fight or flight, hypervigilant response, And we're starting to feel overwhelmed, just with these unconscious thoughts, mostly unconscious thoughts that are happening in our head. And for most people who use food to cope, that's where the food comes in. Because drugs, alcohol aren't quite as socially sanctioned as what we find at Starbucks. What do we find at Starbucks? Until recently. Recently they've added the egg and the apple. But typically we find processed carbohydrate and refined sugar. Even in their drinks, you can't get a soy beverage there that is unsweetened. At least you couldn't. I don't know if you still can now, but point being, processed carbohydrates and refined sugars, we go for those when we're feeling a little unsettled, even if we know we don't want to, even if we promised that we wouldn't. Right? That's what happens, is those particular substances help us to feel a little bit better because of the dopamine sensation or the dopamine release that they trigger in the brain. And I'm going to talk with you more about that. But what happens for the people that I work with is that process exactly. I start to feel a little unsettled about something, or I have a thought about something, and without knowing what's really going on, I start to feel really anxious and unsettled. So for example, I'll talk about me, if I might. So right now, I'm sitting here thinking, holy cow, all of these people came out here. A fair amount of them are mental health professionals. You better sound like you know what you're talking about. And then, of course, this little voice in the back of my head is saying, okay, well, do you know what you're talking about? Yes, I know what I'm talking about. Okay, it's good. But in the meantime, just in that split second of me thinking, oh boy, I have a lot of responsibility here to meet your needs. You've given up an hour and a half of your time, and I want to make sure that you're happy when you walk out this door for my own reputation and for your own needs. So just that split second of me wondering, ooh, can I do that, has triggered this response in me, which you can see, right? Because I'm a little flushed and a little bit nervous, right? That'll go away in a few minutes, just kind of normal jitters. But the thought process of, oh boy, that's a lot of responsibility, oh no, what's going to happen? Even if there's this other part of me that's done this a whole whack of times, and really, really, truly, I know what I'm talking about, I'm not concerned about that, there's still this response. If I don't understand what's going on, as many of the people when they first come to see me don't, I'm going to start judging myself. I'm going to start getting really worried and think, oh no, maybe there really is something to worry about. Maybe I don't really know what I'm talking about. Maybe I'm going to make a total fool of myself. Oh my God, I should just go now, right? And then I'll end up doing what so many people who come to see me do. I'll isolate, I'll withdraw, I'll avoid certain people or certain situations, and then I'll eat those foods, those processed carbs, those refined sugars, and a few other things we'll talk about to help me to feel better, because those make me feel better very quickly. What I'm going to do tonight, though, is not that, because I'm aware of that and I don't do that anymore. What I'm going to do is this thing that I like to teach my clients to do right away. It's called the 4-7-8 exercise. Some of you may have heard of it. It's just a breathing exercise. It's my favorite. I learned it from Andrew Weil. Has anybody heard of him? Yeah? He is considered the founder of integrative medicine. Some may argue that, but I think in our culture that's what he's perceived to be. And he says this particular breathing exercise, and believe me, he knows breathing exercises, is his absolute favorite because it's super simple. You can do it anytime, anywhere. It's really fast. And what it does is these two things simultaneously. One, it cuts off the oxygen flow temporarily to the instinctive part of my brain that's got this little cortisol thing going on, and yours too whenever you get stressed. At the same time, the nature of the exercise forces me to use my frontal cortex, what I call my adult or rational brain, to just focus and be present in the moment. And if any of you have heard of Eckhart Tolle, Power of Now, or have a spiritual practice at all, you appreciate that really when we're just focused on what's happening right here, right now, truly present, what we discover is it's typically just fine. Typically, we are safe. Typically, nothing really bad is happening, nothing we can't truly handle. So the 4-7-8 exercise goes like this. We start by breathing in through our nose for a count of 4, hold our breath for a count of 7, and exhale through our mouth for a count of 8. And we repeat that cycle 4 times, in for 4, hold for 7, out for 8. Then we just have 3 nice, deep, relaxing breaths, and then we do the whole thing again. In for 4, hold for 7, out for 8 times 4. So what I like to do when I'm facilitating a workshop or a group or even for a client for the first time is I like to count for you just to give you something to anchor to. it's very important that you know that you don't have to join in if you don't want to. It's also very important that you know that what's most important from this moment forth, if it isn't already true for you, is that you listen to your body first, not me or anyone else. So if my count doesn't work for you, if it's too slow, too fast, you must listen to your own body. And if you get lost and distracted, just come back to wherever you hear me talking, whatever number I'm on, and just join me then. And just notice if there's a part of you that gets a little critical or a little frustrated or a little resistant, and don't push through that, just notice it, okay? So with the 4-7-8, we'll start with 3 nice deep breaths in and out, and then I'll just count for you. Join me if you like. You can close your eyes if you like. I promise I won't stare at you, but you can keep them open if you like to. So we'll start with a nice deep breath in. And a deep breath means we feel that tummy expanding. Even though it's not socially appropriate to have our tummy stick out, we want to actually really let that happen. And exhale. And push all the air out of our lungs, almost so that we naturally bend over. And then inhale. And exhale. I feel more relaxed already. And inhale. And exhale. And now in through the nose. 1, 2, 3, 4, and hold your breath. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and exhale through the mouth. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and inhale. And hold. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and exhale. 5, 6, 7, 8, and inhale. And hold. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and exhale. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and inhale. And hold. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and exhale. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And now just a nice deep breath in. And exhale. And inhale. And exhale. And inhale. And exhale. And now in through the nose. 1, 2, 3, 4, and hold your breath. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and exhale. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Breathing in. And hold. 5, 6, 7, and exhale. 5, 6, 7, 8, and inhale. And hold. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and exhale. 5, 6, 7, 8, and inhale. And hold. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and exhale. Now I'd like to invite people to just let their breath return to normal. Let it do whatever it naturally wants to do right now, without trying to force it or make it be any certain way. And then it's nice if we just notice, without reaching for it and without judging it, any changes, any shifts, however subtle, in just the last few minutes of breathing, and what we're thinking or how intense or urgent those thoughts are, what we might be aware of in terms of physical sensations in our body or emotions. Again, we're not judging these sensations or thoughts as right or wrong, good or bad. We're just observing, we're just noticing. What's happening? What's going on? And what we typically notice after we've done the 4-7-8, at least after we've tried it a couple of times, is that things just seem a little more relaxed. It feels like we've got a little space between our thoughts and our reaction to them. And so for people who are struggling with the use of food or other substances to cope, having something that they can do anytime, anywhere, in just a couple of minutes, eyes open, eyes closed, doesn't really matter who's around, that helps them to just create a little space between that instinctive response so they can just stop and just think for a moment. Just think for a moment. And I'm going to tell you what I help them to figure out what to think in a moment so that it's functional and helpful as opposed to more of that worrying kicking in. But it's creating that little bit of space, creating enough of a sense of presence in the moment that we can appreciate, okay, we're safe right now. We've got a little time to figure this out before we go for the big guns, whatever that happens to be for us. Okay, so thank you for joining me in that. I hope that was helpful. It was helpful for me. So we'll start with the formal presentation now, if I can. Okay, so I like to start, whether it's, again, presenting a workshop or working with someone one-on-one, I really like to begin with talking a little bit about statistics, because so often when people are coming to work with me, there's this sense that they've received, whether it's from the countless diet programs they've tried, or people that they know who have told them these things, or even other mental health professionals who have told them, oh, eating disorders are like alcoholism. Once you've got it, you got it for life. Well, if you know anything about alcoholism, you know that's not true. At least there are treatment methods that are successful that allow people to be able to drink, well, again, without overdoing it. So when people hear that from a mental health professional or from a doctor, they instantly feel overwhelmed. They feel stuck. They feel doomed. Why bother? If I can't really do anything about this, or if this is going to require some sort of antidepressant for the rest of my life, or I just have to kind of accept where I'm at and I can't because I'm not happy with that, what am I supposed to do? And that's about the point where most people call me, or the CEDRIC Centre. We hear so often when people reach out to us, you're my last resort, I've tried everything. And they really have. They've tried countless diets, again, doctors, mental health professionals, particularly psychiatrists, and tried the medication route, because that's really what our society says is kind of the first stop, right? So it's helpful for us to explore some statistics so that people can appreciate that there's actually more than just you who's influenced by this or affected by this. It's actually a very chronic issue, and it helps us to feel a little less alone. Okay? So you've probably heard some of these stats, but I like to remind people of them just in case. So 80% of 10-year-old girls have tried dieting at least once. That's a lot, especially if you understand what the implication of that is. Why do I try a diet? Except that I feel that either, maybe it's cool, but maybe I'm trying it because I feel there's something wrong with me. Typically, that's what I'm doing. I feel there's something wrong with me, something not quite right about the way I am, and I need to change it. And somehow I got the message that the way to change that is by changing what I eat or what I look like. This is one of my favorite statistics, just for the significance of that. Any given day, 25% are just starting a diet, 25% are on one, 25% are coming off. My math says that's 75% of women in North America on any given day at some part in the diet cycle. And this one I love, because so many people think that it's them that the diet doesn't work for. They're the failure, not the diet. But when you understand that 1 in 3 women have been on more than 10, and I'm sorry guys, there really aren't that many stats for men here. I think I have one coming up, but there really aren't that many. But 1 in 3 women have been on more than 10 diets in their lives. Does that not tell you something? Well, it could tell you, if you were filled with judgment of yourself, that there's something really wrong with you because you've had to try 10. But really, actually, if you think about it, it tells you that there's something not quite right about this approach. If 1 in 3 people have to keep trying it, not working for some reason. I'll tell you a little bit more about why that is. Oh, and this one is really helpful too. Remember this one. Remind your friends of this one, please, when they're saying, oh God, what's wrong with me? 2 weeks. The average woman can stick to a diet for 2 weeks. And again, there's a good reason for that, which we'll get to in a minute. Only 9% of women never diet. And as we know, over 90% of all eating disorders begin with a diet. That's a very old statistic. To be fair, it's difficult to actually find the source of that particular statistic, although it's quoted a lot. But there's a lot of other research that's been done that's right in that number range, so I'm comfortable repeating that one. Other statistics show when we're dieting to try and lose weight, what often happens is we actually end up gaining it. Because what typically happens with all human beings, actually it's animals in general, but we're talking about humans, is that when we experience starvation, or when we go past the natural cues of hunger and we don't respond appropriately by meeting that need, when we next get around that food, if we go 1 hour past the natural hunger cue without eating, when we next get around food, our body, the chemistry in our body is going to trigger us to overeat. It's kind of shut down our awareness of the physical body now, and it's just get in as much food as you can right now. Now that's not even speaking about all of the psychological and emotional pieces that might be leading us to have more than we're physically hungry for. That's just really talking about the physiology of what happens when we don't have enough to eat the meal before and then we next get around food. It's almost inevitable that we're going to overeat. So this is a huge statistic, isn't it? Now, if you're a statistician, you'll say, how can you have 324%? Percent is out of 100. I'm just repeating the statistic, but the point is it's a lot, right? It's a lot. So this I find is also helpful. We have a review that was done of the nation's, this is US, I believe, most popular weight loss programs, and except for Weight Watchers, none of them actually have any peer-reviewed clinical studies that show that they work, which I think is interesting because these diet centers, for example, Jenny Craig or Diet Center, Bernstein's, whatever, have a lot of money. They make a lot of money. So you'd think that they would be willing to fund a study, or maybe they have and it just didn't go that well, but the point is there's no statistics out there except for Weight Watchers, and even then it's not all that promising because it just shows that on average participants lost about 5% of their initial weight in 6 months and kept it off for half of it. So think about all the effort. Have you ever dieted? You don't have to put your hands up, but I did a lot. And all the effort I would have put in to losing about 10 pounds, only to have 5 of it still gone. So 2 years later, I wouldn't consider that successful myself. But clearly, you're not alone, nor are your clients who struggle with food. Whether they are restricting or overeating, binging and purging, there's a lot of confusion around what is normal around food and how to relate to food. In fact, as you can see from these statistics, you are in the majority. I just like to make the point here, maybe beating a dead horse at this point, but there's a lot of diet stuff out there. Lots of pills, lots of drugs, lots of centers, lots of doctors, lots of exercise specialists, lots of boot camps, and we know typically a big part of boot camp is the diet they put you on. I never actually did a boot camp. That was kind of after my recovery time, but maybe someone out there has done one and you can appreciate that most of the time, well, let me tell you it this way. When I have clients who come to me and they're wanting to make a change to their relationship with food, and they've already been going to a boot camp, and I'm kind of something they're adding on to that, one of the biggest problems that they have is getting support from that exercise specialist for them to not follow their diet. Because that's a very important part of the whole process. And eating well and exercising moderately is a very important part of health and wellness. It absolutely is. But what we need to appreciate is that if somebody is eating more than they're hungry for and they don't want to, or they're not allowing themselves to eat when they are hungry, there's more going on than just eat well, exercise moderately. People telling them to just stop it is really not helpful because there's more going on. There's this underlying chemistry, this underlying thought process that's triggering people to behave that way. And if we don't understand that, then we can really do a lot of harm by offering advice and suggestions for how people should approach their relationship with food. So what I like to do is I like to help people to understand. The name of my book is Food is Not the Problem, Deal with What Is. Anybody who struggles with food as a coping strategy gets that right away. It makes perfect sense to them. Oh, yes, of course. If you don't get the title, you don't have the problem, typically. So what we want to do in order to overcome our stressful relationship with food is really focus on how food influences us and why we are eating what we're eating and why we're eating when we're eating. It's very important to answer those questions, right? So why am I wanting to eat right now if I'm not hungry? What's going on? And being able to answer that question and come up with a solution to the trigger that actually resolves the problem, rather than has us focusing on, oh, why did I eat that? What's wrong with me? I said I wasn't going to do that tonight. Oh, okay, I'll start again tomorrow. That sound familiar? No? Yeah. Okay. So what we need is we need a solution that simultaneously attends to each of these pieces. Forgive me, I didn't say at the very beginning, I've put a little notepad here for you to give me your email address if you want me to send you this presentation. Okay? So don't worry about furiously taking notes, but go ahead if you want to, but I'll be happy to send it to you. All right, so now I just want to take a little brief sojourn into talking about the physical side of our relationship with food. I'd love to come over here, folks, but my laptop's here and I need to press it, so I'm not ignoring you. I just can't really see over there very well. So, hormones. Well, we have monthly hormones, we have daily hormones, and we have the change as women, and apparently men too, although I'm not really very educated about that. No, okay, no. It's a myth. Men, no. So, there's these things called hormones, and the hormones in our body are they're really just chemicals, and they influence certain processes in the body. And it's not a bad thing, but we can experience them as less than pleasurable sometimes because of some of the side effects that they have. What we need to understand is that there are certain foods that act as hormones. One of the things that we know about soy, for example, is that it can increase the estrogen stores in the body, which is fine if we need a little more estrogen, but if we already have an overabundance or we maybe have a predisposition to a certain form of cancer, having extra estrogen in the body is not such a great call. So, as it says here, of course, certain times of the month, usually a couple of days before we menstruate, women are perhaps a little more sensitive. Not that we maybe want to admit it openly, but perhaps we're a little more sensitive. What we will notice, what people who use food to cope will notice, is that there's a couple of days before they menstruate where it doesn't matter what diet they're on and how committed they are to it and what they promised themselves they weren't going to eat. Forget it. The gloves are off. They're going for it. And also, it's about that time of the month and into about the second day of our menstruation where we typically feel like the fattest, grossest, most horrendous things on the planet. If we don't understand that it's just chemistry, it's not real, we haven't gained 100 pounds overnight. It hasn't happened really, but we feel like that. If we don't understand that, then what will happen is we'll start to assume that there really is something wrong with us, that I really was bad for eating that thing that I ate, that I'm just out of control, as opposed to actually just my hormones are maybe dropping my dopamine a little bit right now, and so I needed a little something to bump that up. If I understand that, then I can start to ask myself, okay, how else could I do that? What are some things that I could set myself up for at about that time of the month that would naturally keep my dopamine levels high so that I don't have to go crazy on chocolate, or whatever your thing is. Fatigue. So, our energy comes and goes, of course, with sleep, again with hormones, and it comes and goes also with stress, thought processes, and just how much we're asking of ourselves, how physically active we've been. There's nothing wrong with that. This is, if I may just beat the horse a little bit more, this is another reason why diets don't work. Every day is asking something new of us, really. We may have a routine, but it's not exactly the same. The amount of steps I take today are not going to be the exact same as tomorrow or the day before. How physically active I am, what I'm expecting of my brain, which does burn calories, by the way. All of those things are different from day to day. So if I am instead imposing this external rigid structure about this is how much I'm allowed to have at this time of day, and I'm not allowed to have anything more until this time of day, and I'm not listening to what my body is actually telling me about whether it's even hungry right now, or whether it's really hungry right now, but instead I'm actually getting annoyed with my body for being hungry right now because it's not time. Now, that makes no sense. It's completely irrational. But that's the diet mentality. It makes no sense. I'm not listening to my body anymore. I'm listening to what someone else is telling me is appropriate for me to have. And if I'm capable of understanding that as a gentle structure, but that underneath it all, really what I want to do is listen to the cues from my body about hunger and fullness, then it's okay for me to have a gentle structure about, okay, generally, yeah, you eat 4 or 5 times a day, or generally it's good to have protein in the morning. As soon as I start getting rigid about it, I start getting shameful about it, I start getting judgment about it, and I start getting sneaky about it, and then I'm in trouble. So anyway, I'll come back to that in a minute. And of course, illnesses. There were certain things my mom used to make me when I was a kid and I wasn't feeling well. So when I was in my binging days and I felt like I needed nurturing, I wasn't feeling very well, guess what I made for myself? I made those foods. They weren't nutritious, by the way, but there was this thing, there was this kind of memory and these senses that were very much attached to the sense of feeling nurtured. And remember dopamine. Dopamine is this hormone that's responsible for us feeling happy. And things that trigger the stimulation of the release of that dopamine hormone are things like feeling nurtured, feeling comforted, feeling happy, feeling loved, feeling connected. So if I can have a certain food thing that has a chemical reaction in my body that triggers that release of dopamine and also has this sensory thing that reminds me of this feel-good time, I'm going for that when I'm feeling down. I don't care what I told myself I wasn't going to do the day before. So again, I need to be able to understand that's why I'm drawn to have those foods, and I need to be able to offer myself other things that I can do that really meet that need, for example, for connection or nurturing or care, rather than just put the Band-Aid on it. Okay, so as I said there, we've got foods triggering certain memories. They can feed our brains, others can totally zone us out. We'll come back to that in a minute. So emotionally, we may use food to cope with stress. We use it to nurture and soothe ourselves. We use it socially. It's a good way to connect with other people. Can be. So here's this lovely statistic, or not statistic, but a quote from the Journal of the American Board of Family Practice. That doctors are appreciating that we need to treat the whole person by viewing health and disease through the integration of mind, body, and spirit within the context of family and community. That's the medical profession's new motto, which I think is really exciting. It doesn't mean that the training is quite caught up with that, but it means that, it means that, not that it hasn't for everybody, of course, but it means that there's this sense that, okay, it's not just a physical body we're attending to anymore. We really appreciate that there's this social and emotional, psychological component that's very important to health and disease. So as we're going here, we see that, okay, yes, what we eat reflects our culture, kind of what we're raised to eat. And it also has something to do with our self-esteem often. If I know what's good for me, but I'm not choosing that, what's the implication? The implication is that I'm feeling really overwhelmed, and I'm needing something in that food, maybe that chemistry, or maybe that sense of nurturing, or that memory, those sensations that it triggers, and I don't really care right now whether it's good for me or not. And of course, this, you can flip everything that I'm saying here for folks who restrict, and if that's not clear, or if you want to understand how you would look at that from a restrictive perspective, just ask me. But of course, our self-esteem is greatly impacted when we're not caring for ourselves, and it's an indication of our self-esteem when I'm not allowing myself to eat when I am hungry, or when I'm eating more than I'm comfortably hungry for. And that's part of the problem, is we have a sense of that. Okay, I know there's something off, and I know that I'm a good person, or maybe I think I am, or I know that I have good skills, or I know that I'm capable of lots of stuff, so why do I do this behavior? Sorry, I'm just going to scooch ahead here because So we have certain foods that we reach to because we're feeling unsettled, as I've said a couple of times tonight. or that we have kind of without thinking because they're fast, right? They're easy, and I haven't planned very well, and I got overwhelmed, and I'm just ravenous right now, and so I grab stuff. And typically what I go for is the processed carbohydrate and the refined sugar in those moments. Maybe I'll throw a little protein in there, but my body is actually really going for the processed carbohydrate because it's quick fill, it's quick sugar. Remember, when I'm not eating well, my blood sugar gets low, and that's deadly. And my body has all of these mechanisms in it that's going to push me to have certain foods that are going to raise my blood sugar level very quickly. The truth of the matter is it doesn't take much to do that. Half a drinking box of juice will shoot your blood sugar up like you wouldn't believe. It doesn't take a lot, but we end up having a giant Slurpee or one of those big cafe mocha things that's got a lot of sugar in it. So we talked a little bit about dopamine. One of the things that it's kind of neat to realize about dopamine is that it's a hormone that directly influences that sense of pleasure and happiness in our body, but it's in all of these, or each of these stimulate the release of dopamine. And a lot of these are actual problems in our society, aren't they, right? We've got heroin, morphine, and we've got cigarettes or nicotine patches or gum, depending on your thing. We've got cocaine, we've got alcohol, we've got speed and meth, and those particular substances trigger an exaggerated and immediate dopamine response in the body. They just feel so good. And that instinctive brain in the back of our head says, oh, I like that. And whenever we start to feel down, that part of our brain instantly says, ooh, I know what you can do. I know what you can do. And that's how addictions get formed. What many of us don't appreciate is that if we like a particular food, it stimulates the release of dopamine simply because we enjoy it. It's kind of got that nice memory or that nice taste, texture, and whatnot. So we can truly have a dopamine release by eating a carrot, if we like carrots. Okay? It's true. But some foods have a more immediate and impactful effect on the hormones in our body and the happy, feel-good feeling than others. Okay? Interestingly, protein, particularly red meat, triggers that dramatic insulin spike, which triggers that release of dopamine. Dairy. Anybody like yogurt, ice cream, milk, cheese? Cheese, yeah. I had during my binging days, every time I had dairy, I would get a migraine. But the dairy gave me such a sense of pleasure, and it stimulated that dopamine, and I was so stressed and I was so depressed, I didn't care. It was worth a 3-day migraine to have the cream and the cheese and everything that I had. It was, again, kind of an addiction. So we have these opiates in the dairy. And morphine, did you know that? That's kind of neat. Maybe, no, I didn't know that either until I started researching this kind of stuff. And we have amphetamine-like chemicals such as phenylethylamine, which I really don't know what that is. I won't pretend to, but it's amphetamine. Okay, here we go again. Not again to beat the horse to death, but I just want you to understand this. So we've got these processed carbohydrates and sugars, and what they do, processed carbohydrates, when they hit the bloodstream, they immediately dissolve, and they just go straight into sugar, which goes straight into your bloodstream and goes straight to your brain. And it feels good. It's just this addictive thing that kicks in. And then hopefully our insulin system is working, and that can kick in very quickly to counter that, because if you have too much sugar in the bloodstream, that's very dangerous to us, and that's diabetes in essence, right? But again, remember what I said about the meat. The insulin stores and the release of insulin actually triggers a dopamine release as well, so it's a double whammy. Feel good, feel good. And it's fast. Processed carbohydrates are fast. So it's not that carbohydrates like wild rice, for example, don't trigger that release. It's just not the same. We can enjoy it, but if we're trying to get certain needs met through food, certain emotional needs and certain sensations in our brain and that pleasure chemical met through food, healthy food just doesn't cut it, people. It's not going to cut it. So we have to figure something out about that. We've also got the serotonin levels, and that regulates our mood and sleep. Good carbs, as I just said. We get that pleasure center, but it's not quite as exciting. So if we're not reliant on food for meeting our needs emotionally, or for numbing ourselves out, or soothing or nurturing ourselves, it's great. We can eat healthily and truly really enjoy it. But if we're dependent on those foods for that sensation, it's not going to work. Okay. So a few more slides about food, folks, and then I want to get into more of the psychological part of this. So gluten, wheat protein, that has a whole other aspect to it. In addition to what we talked about the dopamine, we have these opiate effects that come from the digestion. The other thing that's interesting is that gluten and dairy have this other substance, and chocolate too, which we'll get to in a moment, have this other substance that prevents them breaking down in the body, or it slows the breaking down in the body. So the kind of stimulation of the brain lasts longer with those foods than with some of the other foods, the healthier foods. Side effects of sugar, we all know. I don't need to go into this with great detail, I'm sure. The other thing that's important to know is that our body is meant to produce sugar naturally through the food we take in, but when we take in the processed carbs and the refined sugar, our body starts to lose its natural ability to refine those sugars, and so we need more of the processed. And that can be reversed, but we have to be mindful that that might be a process that our clients are going through as well, and so there needs to be some understanding and some education around that. Chocolate, we love chocolate, and here's why we love chocolate. Oh boy, so we have the feel-good dopamine from the opiates. We have the caffeine, which is a nice little stimulant. Of course, the darker or more raw or more natural the chocolate, the more this is true. We have the theobromine, which is a stimulant. We have the PEA. We have this anandamide, which I didn't know this, but guess what that's like? That's the active ingredient in THC. It's found in small amounts, but it's kind of interesting, and it's no wonder that we feel so good when we have chocolate. And it's also got those compounds I was talking about that slow the breakdown of this THC component so that it lasts longer in the body. So again, the more natural the cocoa, or the more strong the concentration of cocoa, the more this experience. But of course, with milk chocolate, we get dairy and we get sugar. So that's good too, right? It's a win-win, whichever way you go. But hopefully you understand why you, or people you know, like this stuff. And why, when you're feeling a little down or needing a pick-me-up, or when you're feeling rushed, or you've just gone too long without eating and you need something quickly, why you're drawn to have those particular foods. There's nothing wrong with you. It's not that you're lazy. It's not that you lack willpower. There's this chemistry going on behind the scenes. And the more that you understand that's what's going on, two things can happen. One, you can prepare yourself so that you're not in those situations so much. And two, I forgot what two is. I'll come back. It is important though. Okay. So what we see happening now, and unfortunately the medical profession kind of supports this. So when people come into doctors and they're struggling with weight, or they're not practicing really good self-care around food, say they're restricting, what's often suggested by the doctor is a drug. Oh, and a diet. That's often suggested too. Which of course, if you've already tried many diets and you just feel like, and you, like most women, can't stick to one for more than 2 weeks, that's not really going to feel like a solution for you. And you might be willing to try the medication because you just want to give it a go, or you're just really ready for something to change. But the reality is, the medication is only going to help you to, what's the word? It's raising the dopamine level, but not naturally. What's that word? It's, it's prosthesis, kind of, right? Thank you, we're artificially increasing our dopamine, thank you. What we really want to do, so that we don't need to be on medication forever, is we want to be able to figure out why it is we're feeling the way we're feeling that triggers us to feel so overwhelmed or so anxious or so down in the first place, right? But a lot of people have tried to figure that out and not been able to do that, and that's why they go to the doctor for the drug. It's not that people don't try and that's their first stop. As I said, many people say, wow, you're my last resort. So if we're feeling that we need a sense of connection, or we're not feeling safe. Or maybe it's financially or emotionally or physically. We're not feeling connected with other people. It's human nature that we're going to do whatever we need to do to get that need met. And if I don't know how to meet it in the way that I'd really like, I'm going to put my prosthesis in, and I'm going to have my processed carbohydrate, or I'm going to do the flip side of that, which is the restriction, which gives me something to focus on, allows me to feel like I'm accomplishing something. And there's a certain high and a certain stimulation that I get from that experience of restricting myself. Okay, so food will do in a pinch. But the neat thing is, if we can replace love and connection with food, then the reverse is also true. I can replace food with love and connection, to a certain point, obviously. I want to still eat when I'm hungry and stop when I'm full, but I can replace the times when I'm eating certain foods that I know I really don't want, or that I'm not hungry for, that I'd rather not see myself choose. I can take away the need for food in that moment if I'm actually meeting the need that I really have, which is for fun, play, rest, ease, enjoyment, connection, intimacy, trust, whatever it happens to be. So, there's 3 key areas we need to take a look at. 1, we need to create more opportunities to freely choose foods we enjoy, that satisfy our body and don't trigger the highs and lows in our moods and our blood sugar. We need to be able to very quickly and easily understand what's triggering me in the moment to want this particular food that I've told myself I didn't want to have anymore, or to want something to eat when I'm not hungry, or conversely, to not let myself eat when I am hungry. I need to be able to very quickly figure out what that is. What was that? What just happened? What was I just thinking? Then I need to have something that's really simple in the moment. Remember what we were doing, that 4-7-8 initially? We did that exercise because my brain had kicked in with, oh my God, there's a whole bunch of people here, ah, blah, blah. And it was easier for me, and hopefully for you too, if there was any energy in you, to just take a few minutes to just breathe and create a little bit of space between thoughts and reaction so that we could just think a little more clearly and just relax. Okay? So we need to have tools, maybe that 4-7-8 is one of them, but I also like tools that help us to understand, what was I just thinking? And what is it about that that made me feel so overwhelmed or so bummed that I felt like I needed to have something to eat that I'm not really hungry for or don't really want? Because it doesn't make sense. It's not rational. I know that, but I'm feeling out of control about it. Okay. there's nothing we can do to get that need met because of old training or past experiences, or we've just never been shown how to do that. And whenever we start to feel anxious or unsettled, our auto default is going to be to assume there's nothing we can do, let's just numb out. And that's when we go for our coping strategy of choice. And the intrusive ideation is really just this little game that we might play with ourselves. It's kind of a worst case scenario game. Okay, so let's imagine the worst thing I can possibly think of happening in this particular situation, and then let's plan all the ways that I'm going to handle it so I'm covered, right? Well, yeah, but what if we could actually imagine some other things that might happen that aren't the worst case scenario and plan for those so that we actually set ourselves up for the greatest likelihood of those things occurring? Because it's far more likely, we know the stat, right? 90-some-odd% of the things you worry about never happen. So wouldn't it be great if we actually spent more of our time focusing on what we'd like to see happen and working towards strategies to make that a reality? I think so. Oh, but just to make that clear, why that's significant is if you think again about that brain development and how we're thinking and how we can't help but take everything personally and how we have these needs, and particularly as kids, we're not in power, we're not in control of getting our needs met. We are dependent on other people. And sometimes there are situations where these crazy things happen because sometimes our caregivers aren't all that grounded. I know sometimes I'm not all that grounded. And certainly, sometimes we're raised in environments where there's a real lack of stability and where there's abuse and neglect. And if that's the case, for me as a little person to be able to imagine that nasty thing happening and how I'm going to handle it is actually a really functional thing for me to be spending some time thinking about. Because there's actually a reality that that thing could happen in that moment. What we're talking about with intrusive ideation is now I'm a grown-up. I have power, I have control over where I go, who I spend time with, what I do. I can leave a conversation, I can leave a room, I can leave a relationship, I can quit a job, I can get out of the car. I can do all sorts of things to take care of myself. So I don't need to be planning for this worst case scenario and trying to figure out how I'm going to micromanage every moment of it, because I can actually completely sidestep that and avoid those situations altogether just by thinking about where I want to be, who I want to spend time with, what feels good, and feeling worthy and deserving of that. But if I'm stuck in that old thought process, I'm just going to keep spinning around thinking, oh, I still need to plan for those worst case scenarios. And unfortunately, what happens when I'm thinking in any of these ways is I trigger these feelings. The first response that I have, as we've talked about, is anxiety. And I feel anxious because I'm telling myself I have needs that aren't being met, either because I'm fat, ugly, and gross, or because I'm stupid, or because something really terrible is going to happen. I'm creating distress for myself. But what happens when I'm feeling anxious, just like the rats in the cage in behavioral psych experiments, when I am feeling anxious for a long period of time, I start to kind of disconnect from my feeling sensors. There's really not a whole lot of value for me to be tuned into them. And that leads me to become depressed, or to engage in this coping strategy we call Alexithymia, which is just a complete disconnect from emotion. I'm not even able to tell you what I'm feeling. If I were to ask you, and you struggle with Alexithymia, what you're feeling, you'd say, fine. It's always fine. Or, I don't know. And that's true. It's just meh. Depression is a little darker. Anger is a coping strategy on the feeling level because it helps to distance us from the feelings of fear or distress that we're feeling. It gives us a sense of empowerment. Unfortunately, it has a nasty side effect often. Having said that, anger is a natural response to a threat. It's not bad or wrong, just so that's clear. It's just there are life-enhancing ways of expressing it, and then there's the not-so-life-enhancing ones, so the ones that make people not want to be around us. And then behavioral level coping strategies. So eating when I'm not hungry, not allowing myself to eat when I am hungry, eating beyond fullness, on or off full on. Other behavioral level coping strategies that almost always go with the use of food to cope will be things like isolation, avoidance, or withdrawal. Codependency, feeling very responsible for other people's feelings, very preoccupied with how people are assessing us, that don't have this inner sense of my own ability to determine what feels right and what feels appropriate. I need a lot of feedback, a lot of reassurance from outside. Procrastination, and then, as we talked about before, other substances. So I just want to make that clear before we go into the past-future loop. We have these needs, everybody has them. When they're met, we feel nice and peaceful. When they're not met, we naturally feel a little unsettled to downright panic, depending on what the circumstance is. The appropriate response, what we want to see ourselves doing when we start to feel at all unsettled, is say, I'm feeling unsettled. What was I just thinking? Or what just happened? What was that about? And what can I do about it? I want to approach it from a perspective of there is a solution, let me figure it out. If I use food to cope, that's not what happens. What happens is I start to feel unsettled. I go straight into, uh-oh, something bad's going to happen. Then I go straight into, yeah, because you blah, 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 because you're fat, you're stupid, you were late, you blah, blah, blah. Then I feel more anxious, I feel more depressed, my dopamine levels sink, my cortisol levels go up, and guess what? I need my coping strategy. Even if I promised myself I wasn't going to, I'm feeling so down and so bummed right now, and frankly, I could care less about tomorrow. I need it now. And that's what's happening, is I've got this very confused response to this natural signal from my body that something's not quite right. I'm not sure how to figure out what that means and what to do about it, and so I just keep cycling around. Is that making sense? Okay. 15 minutes, I think I can do it. Okay, thanks for bearing with me. So the past-future loop. So this was a model that I learned in my master's program. I took my master's at Gonzaga University, and I had these, had these two professors, Bennett and Hastings, and they were really wonderful profs, and they had just published their own textbook, and this was one of the key pieces of their model, the matrix. Basically, it's just a visual representation of the reality of humans, which is that at any given moment in time, every single one of us is somewhere on this grid. We're either focused in the past, the present, or the future, and we're in our thoughts, our feelings, our behaviors, or a combination of the three. Another way of saying that is, at any given moment in time, I'm either thinking about something I've done, or thinking about what I'm doing, or thinking about what I'm going to do, and having feelings in response to that. Makes sense, right? No big deal, so what? Well, it's kind of neat, because the reality is, most of the time, it's been shown. This is where we hang out. Thinking about what we've done, and then, without knowing it, without consciously getting it, assuming that this is going to look like that. Okay? So I'm thinking about things that have happened, or let me say that differently. I'm thinking about the job interview I'm going to tomorrow. My brain instantly remembers the last one, which didn't go so well. So I start to feel nervous, and I start to imagine, uh-oh, this is what went wrong with that one, and that means it's going to go bad, and this is the people who think on this side of the curve, right, where I feel anxious and unsettled, I automatically assume something's bad's going to happen, I beat myself up a little bit, makes me feel worse, and then I go use food or alcohol or drugs or numbing substances to cope. I'm going to be thinking about something that's coming up, and I'm going to be remembering the last time that happened, and I'm just going to start worrying. More anxiety, right? Because I haven't allowed for the possibility in that thought process that I could actually intervene and do something about it. That there's this whole thing here called the present, where I could actually sit down, I could ask myself, hey, what was it about that didn't go so well? Was it actually anything to do with me at all? Maybe the interviewers had already decided who they were going to hire, and so they were a little rude to me and really took 2 minutes with me because they just didn't know how to cancel the interview at such late notice. Or maybe I stayed up way too late and had way too much to drink the night before, and so I was just not in the zone. Or a variety of other things. If I just stop, in other words, and ask myself, okay, what am I telling myself about this, about what's going to happen? About this bus ride I'm about to take, about the talk I'm having with my boss when I get to work, about my Thanksgiving dinner with my family that's coming up. What am I telling myself about that that's triggering me to feel unsettled? If I just stop and ask that question, I am 50% of the way there to not using food to cope anymore. Because I'm helping myself to be aware of what it is in the moment about how I'm thinking and how I'm looking at my life that's triggering me to feel anxious. What it is that's making me feel like I have needs that aren't being met. The other 50% is, okay, now that I see that, I have to do two things. I have to figure out how much of that stuff I'm telling myself about what's going to happen is actually plausible or true or very likely. And the stuff that isn't just falls away when I see it. And then the stuff that is, I have to help myself to come up with some solutions. Okay, if I don't want to sit in an interview where people aren't speaking to me or they seem very disinterested, because that didn't feel respectful to me, how would I like to handle it if I find myself in a similar situation again? That's not planning for the worst. It's just saying, okay, I'm worrying because this happened in the past and I don't want to experience that again. So how can I trust myself? How can I reassure myself that I'm not going to find myself in that situation again? And if I can't come up with an answer, who can help me? Who could I ask for? Okay, what do I do if? But a lot of times, because we've got these needs for this acceptance and belongingness, and we're feeling really anxious about whether people are liking us or approving us because of how we've made sense of past events, we're afraid to admit we don't know something. We're afraid to admit that we need help. Or maybe we feel kind of needy or burdensome. And so we don't. And so guess what happens? I don't ask for help. I sat here and I worried about what was going to happen. I didn't do anything about making it different, so it happened. And in my mind, that's proof. See? Told you. Pays to worry. No, that's not quite getting it. The other thing I want you to get out of this model is that when we're thinking about past events or thinking about things that could happen in the future, we don't have the feelings in the past or in the future, we have them now, right? But if I'm not aware, because I'm kind of on autopilot, if I'm not aware that I was just thinking about that thing tomorrow, or that I was remembering what happened through my day, which was kind of stressful, or I was thinking about that call I had with my mom 3 weeks ago, but I'm kind of again on autopilot, not really all that connected to it, I'm not going to know that that niggle or that distress or that sinking feeling I suddenly started having was about that. What I'm going to do instead, and this is kind of natural, is I'm going to look around in the present for some reason why I'm suddenly feeling that way. And most of the time, I'm going to find me and whoever other unfortunate soul happens to be around me at that moment when I'm looking for someone to pin that feeling on. If I don't understand that that's what's going on, I'm feeling unsettled because of this thing that just happened, or this thing I'm worried about, I have a tendency, as all human beings would, to respond inappropriately to the situation at hand. I add perhaps a little more emphasis to the fact that my son didn't put his shoes away. Be able to figure out what I was just thinking, or what just happened. Where was my head at? And what was I imagining, or what was I telling myself about that thing that caused me to feel overwhelmed, anxious, stressed? And is that true? Or how else could it go? Oftentimes, what I find when I work this process with clients is that the first part of their thought is fact. I have a job interview tomorrow. Everything after that is a pile of crap. I have a job interview tomorrow, and that means it's not going to go well because the last one didn't go well, and that means I shouldn't even go, and that means I'll never get a job, and that means I'll live in my parents' basement for the rest of my life, and I may as well just give up now. Right? And that's how we think. And we don't understand why the thought of the job interview makes us feel so depressed, because we've missed these 5 or 6 steps in our logic, if you can call it that got us to stuck, overwhelmed, despairing. Those coping strategies I was talking about, the need to numb out. So being able to notice when we're feeling something that isn't peaceful and realize that all that means is that I have needs that aren't being met. But I don't need to feel overwhelmed about that, because lots of the time the needs that I think I have that aren't being met are just in my head. And being able to see that, being able to prove that to clients or to yourself quickly is very relieving. Being able to understand that, okay, so the reason I'm feeling anxious right now is not exclusively because I just ate that giant tub of whatever. It's actually, I ate the giant tub of whatever because I was feeling anxious. And I was feeling anxious because earlier today my boss said he wants to talk to me tomorrow, but I don't really know what it's about. And I had that altercation with Mary Ann 2 days ago, and I wonder if she went to talk to him. And, is that familiar? that's where we go in our head. And again, a lot of that is very unconscious. We're in this past-future loop, back and forth between, ooh, this is coming, ooh, that happened last time, that means this is going to happen. And again, we forget that we can anchor right here, right now. We can say, okay, that's tomorrow. I still have time to intervene. I could just not go to that interview if I really don't trust myself to handle it well, or to handle it with dignity and respect, or to take care of myself, or to get up and leave if people are being rude to me. I could choose to take care of myself and not go, rather than, I just have to get through it. If I start thinking in that other way, ooh, I could just take care of myself, I could just figure out what this sensation means about what I need, and I could start to learn how to really trust myself to respond appropriately to that, either by letting go of all the crud thinking, or by whatever, and by whatever actual problem remains that I really do have, seeing myself capable, seeing myself able to find support or to find an answer myself. One of the things that I will tell you, and I don't have time to give you a lot of examples, but I promise you, and if you want to run through some examples with me, you can always email me or phone me. When I work through this process with clients, there's often this sense that, no, Michelle, it really is about the food. It really is. It is about the food. But when we actually just stop and think about it, or I invite them to think about, okay, just before you had that thing, what happened? Oh, well, you know, I was on the bus, but it's not about the bus. Okay, well, what happened on the bus? And it doesn't have to be a big thing. It's not a major trauma necessarily, again. It's kind of how we're thinking about it that triggers us to feel overwhelmed. And one of the things that I think is really important for us to understand about this is that when we automatically, without knowing it, respond to that natural sense of distress by assuming there's nothing we can do, and by assuming that I just have to self-medicate, in essence, I just have to numb or soothe myself, that really is, in that moment, an act of self-care. It's really, truly not an act of negligence or abuse of self. It's misguided self-care. I'm feeling overwhelmed, I'm feeling stressed, I'm feeling anxious, I need something, I don't know what to do, I'm going to soothe myself. What we need to be able to do is appreciate that there's a reason why we're doing that, figure out what that is, and see ourselves, again, taking action to meet those needs and respond appropriately then. And then what happens, and this is the part that people just don't believe, is that the need for food just falls away, or alcohol or drugs or whatever it happens to be, the shopping, the gambling, the relationships, all that kind of stuff. Because when I'm actually able to meet the needs that I'm seeking to meet through those substances and the immediate dopamine release, and I don't have all the side effects and all the psychological baggage and the emotional baggage of the use of those coping strategies, it's a no-brainer. The other thing that people see right away is that there truly is always a very simple solution to what's really going on when they actually are able to identify the real problem that they had. Somebody was in my seat on the bus. Okay. So rather than assuming that means no one cares about you and no one ever will and you should just never go to work again and just give up, why don't we just maybe ask that person to move? And then we come up with what's really going on there. Well, then they wouldn't like me. Or then they might get mad at me. Or they might say no, and that would mean I'm not important. And that gives us an opportunity to support people to say, okay, well, now we're talking. Because now we're not talking about the substances or the addictions or the surface stuff. Now we're actually talking about the fact that all you really need is a little bit of education on what interdependent relationships look like. That it's okay for you to ask for what you need. And sometimes people will say no, but that doesn't mean that you're not worthy. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It doesn't mean you're not deserving. It just means in that moment it doesn't work for that person to get up and move. And then we can actually learn some skills for, okay, so maybe we wouldn't actually do this in reality, but to keep going with the analogy, maybe if we ask this person would they mind moving and they say no, maybe we could say, okay, well, what is it about moving from the seat that doesn't work for you? In my marriage, I would ask my husband that question. Like, what is it? Because I want to understand. I don't want to take it personally. I don't want to make mountains out of molehills. And I love him and I want to understand him. And so when I ask for something, when I ask for a need to be met, like, could you take the garbage out? And the garbage doesn't go out. then rather than taking it personally or assuming he's incompetent or doesn't care or can't figure it out or whatever, I can't trust him, I can't rely on him, what I prefer to do is say, sweetie, you said you're going to take the garbage out. What happened? And give him an opportunity to explain. Because lo and behold, he always has a pretty handy excuse. There's always a pretty good reason. And it's legitimate. Even if sometimes it's, I forgot. But if I'm not taking it personally and I'm not making it about whether he loves me or whether I'm acceptable to him or important to him or my whole self-esteem hinges on whether this person moves off the bus or whether I get the job interview or whether my husband takes out the garbage, then I have all this room to be able to ask questions, to take the time to understand. It's not so stressful to relate. I'm not taking things so personally. I'm not assuming the worst. I'm not so anxious and so overwhelmed. And guess what? I'm not needing that food to cope. So, in essence, what we've just discovered is that everybody has needs. And when our needs aren't being met, we feel anxious. There's nothing wrong with that. If I haven't been taught how to listen to those naturally occurring signals of needs and respond appropriately by figuring out what's not working and what I need to do about it, I'm going to shut down to them with whatever coping strategy I've devised. Maybe I get angry, maybe I push people away, maybe I isolate myself, maybe I drink, maybe I smoke pot, maybe I eat certain food. That's all that is. So if I reverse that, if I have a problem with a particular substance or there's some pattern of behavior that I am not wanting to keep in my life, or even certain emotions that I'm not really too keen of, or the experience of depression or flatness that I want to change, the solution is for me to start to understand what's going on in here. What is it, or here? What is it that I'm feeling? And what is that feeling telling me about what I'm thinking? And what are those thoughts telling me about what I need? And as with the garbage hubby analogy, if I go in my mind to, oh, he didn't take out the garbage, that means he doesn't care about me, that means he's not reliable, that means I can't trust him, that's all in my head in reality. And I've just done a big number on myself, stressed myself out, made myself really anxious, and caused a lot of distress perhaps for the two of us with that thought. Whereas if I just go into a different place with that and I say, okay, he didn't take the garbage out, let me figure out why that was. Let me just ask some questions. Stephen Covey, who died recently but was a very powerful mentor to me, wrote this really great book, which almost every single client I've ever had owns but hasn't read. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Anybody here own it? Okay. I won't ask if you've read it, but really, really straightforward, logical approach to life. Let's get clear on what our values and principles are. Let's get clear on what our intention for life is. Let's get clear on what stands in the way of us following through on these things. When it comes to relationships, let's take the time first to understand the other person. Because what I've discovered in doing that is most of the time I don't need to say anything. If I actually listen and I take the time to figure out what's going on with you, my problem with you almost always dissolves. Because my problem with you, if I have one, is usually I've misunderstood you. Or I've made assumptions about what you were up to or why you were doing a certain thing. And if I just ask certain questions, that usually becomes clear. I find for myself in teaching clients how to just stop and notice what they're feeling, what that means about what they're thinking, and how to kind of tease apart the baloney from the reality. That almost every single time they themselves are immediately able to come up with a solution. They don't need me for that. Their brain already works really well. We just need to get this other piece not happening anymore. And that's very exciting for people who have been thinking for many, many years that there's something wrong with them, or they just don't care enough about themselves, or they lack willpower, or whatever it is, they're doomed, it can't work for them. For people to see very quickly that when they're just able to start to think clearly, they already have an answer, they already have a solution, or 2 or 3 that would work for them. It's very inspiring. Immediately they feel more peaceful, more confident, more secure, more capable. And then when they see themselves taking action actually with those ideas they come up with, their self-esteem grows. And it's a really positive loop of, oh, okay, I know what to do with this feeling. I'm not overwhelmed by it anymore. This means I have to figure this out. and I know how to figure this out. And when I figure it out, I know what action I need to take, and things get better. Let me just scooch ahead and see if there's anything else I want to share with you, and then I'll let you go. I know we're at time. Oh, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about natural eating, because if you look at the website or if you read my book or any of the materials, you'll see that I talk about natural eating. I just want to explain what that is, okay? Natural eating is simply eating in response to our body's signals of hunger and fullness. It's eating when I'm hungry. Thank you for coming. It's eating when I'm hungry, stopping when I'm comfortably full, allowing everything in moderation. No guilt, no shame, no extra attachment. I'm just really able to listen to if I'm hungry, and I'm able to trust myself to know how much I need. And the thing that I want to tell you is that even if I'm working with somebody who has been overeating or restricting for a very long time and is absolutely certain that they have no idea when they're hungry or if they're hungry or they've lost the ability to sense those cues, within 3 to 5 days, they're able. It's often a day of just noticing. And there's a little exercise that I lead people through to help them to figure that out. But it's not a long process is what I want to get through to you in closing tonight. It's the process of learning how to listen to your body. The process of learning how to determine whether it's a physical sensation of hunger and fullness or whether it's an emotion is not a long process. And the process of learning out how to respond appropriately to the problems I actually have and how to get rid of all the extraneous worst-case scenario thinking is not a long process. It's just being able to figure out how to connect the dots and figure out what's going on that a lot of people have struggled to be able to figure out how to do. But once you're able to figure out those pieces and put it together, it's usually a couple of months for someone to be able to start to listen to their body and respond appropriately, whether it's about action they need to take about a job or a relationship, or whether it's about whether they're hungry or full or need to have a drink or get some sleep. So there's lots more I could say. We could go on for days and days, but we have to stop now. So I don't know if we have any time for questions.